Want to do something exceptional, you got to be prepared to take the risk of pushing the edge of the envelope.
Every entrepreneur wants to know this as you talk about scaling. Growth is expensive.
So how do you stay so fearless in trying new things after so much experience?
I think the basic philosophy is you want to grow. You may solve your financial aspirations, but it's the next generation in the company. How do we keep them motivated to want to get ahead? It comes back to having a growth mentality of the business. And what's Kenny Rogers saying? You got to know when to hold them and when to fold them.
And when to walk away and when to run.
Welcome to Mistakes Over Failure. I'm Dr. Christine Crawford.
And I'm Debbie Carew. We have got a very special guest for you today.
We are joined by Jack Cowin. And welcome. We're excited to have you. And if you could please introduce yourself to our listeners.
My name is Jack Cowin. I'm a expatriate Canadian who moved to Australia 55 years ago. And I've been involved in entrepreneurial businesses ever since. And it's a wonderful place to live. I've got 4 kids, 12 grandchildren. I was chancellor of the university I went to in Canada, which was a big thrill. I'm an ex-gridiron player and the 1964 heavyweight college wrestling champion. That's my main attribute. Yeah,
wow.
I'm saying that half facetiously, but it's true. Yeah.
Now we just got to look for photo evidence.
I'm sure you didn't have to know that, but I just threw that.
Oh, I'm going to go look at archives now.
Okay.
As a fellow Canadian, I feel compelled to go down that rabbit hole with you.
Check it out. Yeah.
Excellent. We usually start off with just a couple icebreaker questions, if that's okay, some rapid fire for you. So let's start off with, are you a morning person or a night owl?
Night owl.
Me too.
Definitely.
Yeah, I am as well.
Cats or dogs?
Neither. We've been through the history of cats and dogs, but when you travel a lot, which we do, who's going to look after the dog? Dog hotels, cat hotels, things like that just got too hard. So when the last cat disappeared, we've been petless. Okay. And it's been okay.
But between 4 children and all your
Definitely.
grandchildren, I think you've got
definitely
more than enough to keep you busy.
Yes.
What was your last vacation?
Last vacation was, I went to Barcelona and to a conference, and I have a boat in the Mediterranean, so we spent a week on that.
Oh, sounds lovely.
Yeah, it was good.
So nice. And then my last rapid fire question, do you believe that things are nature or nurture when it comes to people?
That's an interesting question. There's probably no black or white on that because, you can get all kinds of examples on either way. But, largely speaking, the mind controls what you're going to do and how successful or how hard you're going to work and all those other things. So I believe that people can develop and grow, understand what you're good at, understand what you're not good at. So nurture to me is something. Obviously, there are people who got talent and, that kind of runs out their ears and things like that. They have an advantage than those that have to depend on finding it step by step and working their way through. So if I had to vote on it, I'd say nurtured.
I love it. And that's probably why you're such a successful entrepreneur.
Maybe. Yeah.
The hustle and the grit.
Correct. Yeah.
So was there something in particular about your growing up and in your nurturing that led you to leaving Canada and coming here? And
yes. When I was in high school, my father he worked his whole life for the Ford Motor Company. And they sent him to Australia for 6 months because they built an engine plant near Melbourne. He came back and he said, if I was young again, I'd move to Australia. It's the land of the future, milk and honey. China's on the doorstep. All these India's not far away. All the population. You can feed them and you can develop. And so that I was predestined to want to come. And I finished university and had a job, but inside I had this burning desire to want to become self-employed, to have my own business. And I think part of that, which I've only realized in later life, was since I grew up in a corporate family, the phone rings, oh, you're now going to Mexico or you're now going here and there. I wanted to have independence to do what I wanted to do when I wanted to do it. And that was the drive. And so that's how I think this thing evolved. Anyway, a couple of friends of mine got sent to Australia to do market research for the American Kentucky Fried Chicken Company. And since my father had been here, and I was probably the only guy in the class that knew where Australia was on the map, they phoned me up and said, hey, you should come down here. All the things you like in life are here. So 3 weeks, boom, I'm here. Paid $1,000 deposit on a franchise area. Went back to work in Canada. And I got a call 6 months later saying, you're going to lose your $1,000 if you don't do something. So I didn't, I had a house, I had a mortgage, I had a 6-month-old child, and no money to speak to start a business. So I got 30 Canadians who lent me $10,000 each. So I had $300,000 in my back pocket, moved to Australia and got started with one store in Perth, Western Australia. Oh. So that's kind of how it evolved.
And hospitality has served you well, or you've served hospitality well over decades?
Yeah. That business today is it's called Competitive Foods, and it's like a $3 billion revenue business. We have other business with another $1 billion in North America. So, but it's been an adventure, moving and, trying to, make mistakes and trying to sort things out and challenges. But people say it has been an adventure. And one of the things I think I've learned along the way is if you don't like what you do, you got to change. You have to have the courage to step up and say, this isn't going to work. And I've never had that problem because I've never worked a day in my life. You hear that? I've never worked a day in my life because I've enjoyed what I'm doing and continue to. People say, when are you going to retire? I say, you never retire. You never retire.
I was actually getting ready to ask you, so what's your next adventure?
Well, my next adventure is to keep on doing what I'm doing as long as I can. I don't have to have something new.
Okay.
As I say, going to work every day is part of the adventure. You're doing new things. The businesses continue to do things. Right. And so it's a daily adventure. Yeah.
That's a lovely way of looking at it.
And I think we've talked about this too. I mean, both of us also believe that we've never worked a day in our life.
Yeah.
Yeah, or not right now, anyway. Well, maybe earlier in our careers, definitely. I think we did. We talked about off camera a little bit about the businesses that you've gravitated towards and had so much success in, these people-intensive businesses. Can you talk to us a little bit about your leadership philosophy and what you look to in people? Because clearly you've had to find a lot of talents.
Yeah. A little side story. When I'm going to go into the fast food business, I know zero about food. And I went to a 1-week training program in Louisville, Kentucky to teach me to move to Australia and run a business. 1 week, okay. One of the exercises was you had drumsticks. You put the drumsticks into boiling hot oil in a big vat so that the skin doesn't boil. And one of the pieces of chicken I had fell out and splashed on my hand. And I had a eureka moment that said, if I have to depend on my skills to make this business work, I'm in trouble. So from that moment on, I had a very clear path. I have to hire somebody that knows what to do and how to run this because I'm obviously not cut out to do this. And I think if I looked at kind of my life over the last 50 years, that's been what I've been able to do is how do you attract people that may be smarter than you are, that may have more skills in different areas than I have. So it's been how do you get the orchestra to play together? And it's not any kind of specific skills that I've got as much as how do you get the team together? And how do you get the team to interact properly together? So it's been that's been, I think, the experience.
So as you've built teams, right?
Yeah.
How do you ensure that spirit in which you've led the orchestra is continued, right? And how do you build culture and adjust when necessary as you're training and building and?
Yeah, I think it depends on the situation. Where's the strength? Where's the weakness? How do you get some balance in the team? And I think it's, it's comes back to a desire to try and do something well, whether it's selling hamburgers or pizza or making widgets,
Okay.
How do we do this the best we can? And how do you then try and get people to say, okay, you've heard this, how do you get a purpose behind trying to do something well? And I think I've been very fortunate to be able to attract people that, have been able to get on the bandwagon here and keep it going and build a business.
Yeah, and hospitality is notorious tough for having high turnover. And
Yep.
so to be able to keep the people and have them grow and see careers.
I have to tell you, we just had a dinner at my house for a girl who's been with us for 50 years.
Oh, wow.
And we got 3 others in that are also in that same category.
Oh, that's amazing.
And it's, I just was listening, Bill Heineke, what I mentioned, he just said, people today have less attention, it's shorter.
Yeah.
Work, used to the idea of 50 years with one company is probably a real exception. And the young today probably don't have that same degree of, they're looking for new experience, all the time. And job changes sometimes come into that. How do I work my way through? So I think the other factor that maybe touch on this, you can't stop. You have to grow. If I'm a young 25-year-old guy and the business isn't growing, what's my future going to be? I've got all these other guys ahead of me. If you continue to grow and expand, then there's a potential future there. Mm-hmm. So for 50 years, we continue, we reinvest. One of the benefits of being a private company is you can reinvest the money back into the business. And we've done that. Yeah. And it's paid off. Yeah.
So as you reinvest, how do you think about future, right? So if you've been around for 50 years, obviously you've seen lots of changes, lots of transitions. How do you think about what to reinvest in so that, this business can go on for another 50?
Yeah, just somewhat as an aside, we've had, and you'll be interested in this, Debbie, we had a significant change in our business. There's a company in the U.S. called Chick-fil-A, which you may or not know. Yeah. And, the average McDonald's in the U.S. does $3 million in sales. Chick-fil-A does 9 in 6 days. Yeah. And a Chick-fil-A manager, you know what they make? It's $500,000 a year. Yeah. So we said, how can you sell 9? What's the magic here? Food isn't that different. Right. But they do have highly motivated people running their restaurants. So we took that, having run a business of, you're the store manager, here's the salary range, whether you're good or bad. You got a bonus system, which they think you'll find a reason you don't have to pay that. We spent 40 odd years doing that. And we took and we developed what we call a partner manager system in which you get paid on your performance. So here's the target. If you can beat that, then you get, we got store managers making $250,000, $300,000, whereas previous it was like 70, 80. So these people now, they can buy a house, they can send their kids to schools and things like that. So we're really proud of the fact that this program has revolutionized our business. And we're very proud of the people and it's compensating people that produce the results. And then that is contagious. If I see you, if I'm one of these, young people, making 70 grand a year and you're making 250 or 300, what are you doing that I should be doing? Because I want the same compensation, and it works. So it wasn't our idea; we stole it, and it has worked.
I'm going to tell you a funny story about this program. Yeah. So remember, I told you when I was doing my undergrad, I was running a restaurant full time. Yeah. In the restaurant chain that I was working for, I was their very first ever managing partner. And the system started as you got paid a nominal salary, like $30,000 or $25,000, but you got 8% of EBITDA.
There you go.
And then every 5 years, you could 3x that on top of the 8% you've been taking, or you could roll it. And so this, I ended up being in my early 20s, making 10x what my salary was. And that's how I got hooked on hospitality, was exactly what you're talking about.
Great.
And again, the company that I was with, I'm sure that they didn't invent it either, but it was brilliant.
Yeah.
And I never looked at another career. Like all these aspirations I had of Big Four consulting and a big career, I ended up staying in the restaurant business for a solid decade before I did anything else.
So money isn't everything, but if you can get people who want to do better, it's the measuring stick, and if, half our business, you have to qualify for it. And, if it raises the aspiration level, that's what it does, and makes people want to produce and run the business better. And as I say, that's this Chick-fil-A philosophy, which we stole. I know the Chick-fil-A people, and they don't mind. Yeah.
But I think, but you talk about not being afraid to steal or borrow or learn. And that's something, though, as business owners, a lot of times we get comfortable, right? In that I've always done it this way and wonder, what is it going to look like if I make such a big shift? So how do you stay so fearless in trying new things after so much experience, right?
Well, I think the basic philosophy is you want to grow.
Right.
And you want this business to continue to be. And two things. One, forget about the money side. Those you become dependent on these people down here, and then that next level. And you may solve your financial aspirations, but it's the next generation in the company. How do we keep them motivated to want to get ahead? And so I think it comes back to having a growth mentality of the business. And then if you're rewarded for it, it's kind of an extra. Yeah. You get that philosophy.
I'm going to stay on this topic because this is, every entrepreneur wants to know this as you talk about scaling. Growth is expensive, right? And so being able to believe in yourself, believe in your company, believe in your people, and the same token, reinvesting and often people have mortgaged their homes, like every penny that they have, and maybe their friends and family's money's in their business. What do you recommend to entrepreneurs when you look at growth? Because it's like, do you take outside capital? Do you keep growing? Do you plateau for a while? Like, how do you think about growth when you think about that? Not from a scale of where you're at, but maybe where you were.
No, well, it comes down to the preparedness to accept risk. If you have to have in your mindset, if I'm going to have something, a worthwhile achievement, I have to take risk. Because if you don't want to take risk, you can just have a muddling sort of normal sort of life and job and things like this. If you want to do something exceptional, you got to be prepared to take the risk of pushing the edge of the envelope out. And that means borrowing money and not taking crazy risk. The flip side of that coin is you also got to be, what's Kenny Rogers saying? You got to know when to hold them and when to fold them.
And when to walk away and when to run.
So you also have to be prepared not to die on your sword if something you've miscalculated along the way.
Is there an example of something that you miscalculated?
Yes, lots.
Okay, so your favorite miscalculation, the one that taught you the most?
Well, I'm just thinking there's a U.S. firm called Jersey Mike's. Do you know that? Mm-hmm. The fellow that owns the business, Peter Cancro, he started with one restaurant. He just sold it for $8 billion to Blackstone. And he came and we're going to do a partnership here. We opened 3. Here's one of the smartest guys in the whole industry. They failed. Boom. Okay. You got to know it wasn't working, so we cut it off. That was it. Very smart people. We know what the mistakes were now, looking back. We went into suburban shopping centers. People thought we were overpriced Subway, because Subway were kind of the pervasive. But, it didn't work. And so we accepted that, and you hit it on the head. But, I think that's part and parcel of, you talk about the franchisee, you talk about the guy who's going to set up his own business. You have to be able to be prepared for what comes with risk, which is, this is not going to be an easy road. I say to people, if you're going to be really sick, it almost becomes an obsession. I say that in a friendly sort of way. But most people that I know that have been highly successful are somewhat obsessed with what they're doing. And if you want a peaceful life of, peace, calm, sleeping 8 hours a night without waking up or the phone ringing to say something, get a job somewhere and be comfortable. If you want to be really, you got to take some of this on board.
Yeah.
Some of the things that go with it. Yeah.
I could ask you so many questions. I'm going to keep going down this.
You can relate to this. You can relate to it.
Oh, all of it. Like we could be here for days, Jack. I'm just forewarning you. One of the things I'm really curious about, because obviously we're here in Sydney, public versus private. So many entrepreneurs now, when they want to take chips off the table, they want to go public. This is a conversation I find particularly in Australia. There's a lot of conversation around the number of public companies and entrepreneurs wanting to go public. Can you talk about how you think about public?
I'm a double agent.
I know you are.
Yeah, I've got this. I have this private company which I started with the 300,000, from 30 Canadians who got their money back, and we've gradually bought the shares back, and that's been my kind of mainstream business. But I also, I'm the chairman and largest shareholder in the Domino's is in a public company. 12 countries, 3,500 outlets, 120,000 employees in all those stores. And the difficulty of the latter, the public company, is short-term versus long-term thinking. And when you have to answer the analysts and things like this, they're constantly looking at what's going to impact the share price. And sometimes, unfortunately, to meet those objectives, people make short-term decisions which may not be in the best long-term interest of the business. So you have to sell hard to get people to understand that what you're doing is in the long-term interest of it. But you don't have that problem in private companies. You do what you think is right and what the eventual payoff is going to be. Public, you get the exposure, you get you get the criticism, you get the doubts of people that are saying, we want continuous kind of return on shareholder investment, things like that. So I have a bias for private companies. And,
So if you were to take the counter arguments, what's a good reason to go public?
You get the highest price on the sale. If you have a high growth company, which is based on high growth, you have the possibility of having a very high price. So that's not all bad. Then the question is, how do you get liquidity for that? Which kind of the part and parcel of that same exercise. Somebody comes along, wants to buy your business, so that's you're going to sell. How do you get the highest price? So that's the benefit of a public company. Raising money, this is much easier today as a private company because there's enough pools of capital around of people that are prepared to invest into private companies. In my early days, that wasn't the case. But public companies probably have an easier run of raising money to be able to grow and build a business.
So you've managed to have, I think, your feet in both ways. So public, private, I think also kind of franchise or franchisee. You've managed to do both along the way. Has there been anything that you would share with newer business owners about understanding the other side, right? So how do you think about and what lessons and how do you become better, say, as a franchisee if you better understand the franchisor or vice versa, right? Can you help us or make some suggestions on how people can do that or if that's important, if you think it's important? I don't.
Oh, give me again. Come again.
So I think as someone who used to be a franchisee, right, understanding that the business goals of your franchisor are not always necessarily the same as yours, right? And vice versa.
Yes.
Right? And so I wonder how you think in both ways, right? So because you've managed to do that both again with public and private companies, franchisor and franchisee. So how do you manage to step out of a particular role to see the other side?
Yeah.
Is that
Well, we have walked both sides of the road.
okay?
One of the problems of big companies, big corporations, is that you have people working for them whose job is to expand and grow. And if you're the franchisee, maybe we should be buying you. And big companies can often try and take advantage of the little guy. And I can tell you a story. We, in the late 90s, we had a visit from we have a relationship with Burger King, and they were owned by Diageo, which is a big liquor company.
Right.
And they would have looked at it and said, who's this company we have a relationship with in Australia that's called Hungry Jack's? Why doesn't he call it Burger King? Go buy him out. So this English lawyer arrived and he said, we're here to buy your business. And we said, what if we don't want to sell? And I said, well, what if, maybe we won't want to. What are we going to do? He said, we'll make it very difficult for you. We'll come in and expand, which they had the ability to do, and which they did. And we're going to stop you from growing. And I said, well, you can't do that. We got a contract. So anyway, we're at a stalemate in which we couldn't do anything for probably 5 years while we're in court. And long story short, they went to court and we won $70 million in damages that they had done by stopping us from being able to grow. And that was a product of a big company with the philosophy that the little guy will eventually fold. And so you have to have the ability, if you think, and I during that whole process, 5 years, $8 million of legal fees, I had the kind of the basic, they can't do this. We got a contract. We're not in violation. They made stuff up to say, okay, you can't open any more stores. And I had enough faith that we were right. And fortunately, that we were fortunate enough to be able to win the court case. But during that whole period, you're filled with, anxiety of what if it goes wrong, and so maybe you cave in. And we if they would have been sent, we would have caved in.
Okay.
Yeah. But big companies work on the basis of the little guy will fold. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, that's just kind of part of life.
What kept you going? Was it conviction? Was it values?
I think so.
Stubbornness?
Stubbornness, probably.
I had to throw that one in there.
Probably. But, I think if you think you're right, it's somewhat weak to cave in early. And as I say, 5 years later, $8 million in legal fees. I've got a lot of self-doubt, And so verdict's coming down on Friday morning, and I'm kind of sitting there wondering, what's going to happen here if we win or lose. So that's the franchisor, and the franchisee is somewhat at a disadvantage in kind of a commercial relationship. They own the brand, they own the trademarks and things like that. So in becoming a happy franchisee, you have to be prepared to accept that, the person that owns the system has more clout in the transaction than you do. You have to accept that somewhat. It's only when they get unfair. When today they wouldn't even try to do that because the law has changed. But in that particular situation, they did and would. So anyway. Today we live happily ever after. We're their best friends. We pay them too much money. But,
Never fun to write the percentage checks, is it?
Yeah.
I've got a completely different question for you. Sort of staying on the franchise relationship. One of the things that I told you offline that YPO, we spent a lot of time studying the Domino's case study, particularly because we love the fact that they've focused on their strategy, then their structure, and then their systems. You lived through the time of their big digital transformation.
Yeah, the Domino's stock in 2008 was $3.
Yeah.
Today it's $400. So there's Patrick Doyle, who was the president, got on TV and said, our pizza is unacceptable. Tastes like wallpaper, blah, 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 blah. And from that point on, his transition was up. So probably an acceptance of where reality is and what you're doing, whether you're doing it right. And that's the way that all worked out.
During that time period, if you put yourself back there, did you think that what he was saying made sense, or were you worried about the stock price? Were you like, thank goodness?
That was more of a U.S. situation.
Okay, specifically?
I think we ran our own race down here.
So you were separated a little bit from it?
Yeah, and we didn't really have, we had problems of our own and, kind of things that we inherited, but that was kind of a U.S. sort of thing. And that when I talk about the shocks, that was kind of U.S. driven. Yeah.
You didn't have to live that one quite as closely?
No. Yeah.
How do you differentiate your brand, right? And so there is a set of U.S. problems, but it is Domino's here. And so how do you, as chair of the board, and what role does governance play in how you think about brand and the future of your brand?
Well, I mean, as well that sales kind of drive everything. So that has to be. And in the Domino's business, it's franchisee driven.
Right.
So our major occupation is how do you enable the franchisees to make more money? And that's because if they're successful, they'll open more stores, the royalties will go up, the markup that you get on food goes up. So it's a win-win. Where this thing gets offside is when one side, i.e. the franchisor, is making more money. And where our business here had some problems, in which we're just kind of getting out of, is they got into the ultra discount business, in which to move more volume, price became the issue, and the business became price driven at a discount. And a couple of things happened. One, customer says, if it's that cheap, maybe there's something wrong with the product. And secondly, if price is all you have to offer, then you've got difficulty, because you get down to the level which you're selling product, you're not making any money on it. Mm-hmm. The franchisor is, because we're getting royalty. Mm-hmm. Franchisees taking it in the next. So we're in the midst. That's one of the things that we are currently working on. How do you solve that problem and making the franchisees more successful?
I love hearing that. You don't hear many franchisors asking that question. It's a brilliant question, and that's a long-term vision.
Yeah.
I think that's probably, as I get to know you better, one of the reasons why you've been so successful is you ask these questions that everyone's asking.
Both parties got to win. If franchisees make a lot of money and the company doesn't,
correct,
then this thing is not going to work. So it's got to be, how do you get balance?
One day offline, we need to compare our quick service stories. We won't bore them with you, but when you said the part about the fryer oil splashing on your hands, I immediately looked at my hands for my scars. I too was not very good working fryers, let me tell you.
Yeah.
Very, very quickly, I was promoted to front of house.
But I recognized what I could do and what I couldn't do, and I knew that my job was get the people, get the locations, get the money to be able to expand, things like that. And then meanwhile, hiring the people that can do the operational aspects of the business. And I've never, in 50 odd years, run a restaurant per se, because that's been my job. And other people can do this better than I can.
But I think it goes back to what you said, that the kitchen shows you who you are, I think, very quickly. And in a way that very few places in the workplace, with the oil popping and with all of the pace. It's
and then how do you keep these people on side? One of the big benefits we talk about this partner manager program is that turnover stops.
Okay.
Big expense in this industry is that revolving door of people training them, trying to get them to do things right. If all of a sudden they can make really good money, it stops. If I'm an assistant or even a kitchenette, okay, I can become an assistant. They can see that goal or the gold at the end of the rainbow.
And if they can just put a little bit of money in, then it's a big deal for them. Like I remember in my case, having to go to a bank manager and try to get this loan to be able to qualify for this program. That's also a little bit of golden handcuffs, but that's not what keeps you long-term. But it definitely having skin in the game and sort of your virtual name on the door.
Here, the bottom line of this is, how do you get people to think like they're owners?
Yeah.
That is the objective. Their employees.
Yeah.
How do you get them to think like an owner, as if this is their business and their bottom line? And if there's a profit share, which this is all about, then that's mentality that clicks in.
I've got one final question for you, because we could keep you for days, but we won't.
Yeah.
We have 4 generations in the workplace today. As you said, you've got 4 children, you've got grandchildren. We've both got young people in our lives. I've got 2 kids that are in college. What advice would you give to the generations that are just starting to enter the workforce?
Get experience, family business, get a job someplace else, which may relate to what the family business is. People go into consulting. I think that's great because you get exposure to different things rather than just and kind of the head-on sort of clash. I've got 3 daughters, 1 son. My son, he runs what we call the family office. He runs the investments. And the 3 girls are kind of full-time moms, so they're not really involved in the business per se. We have a next generation, which is on the grandchildren now are starting to come along, 12 of them. And I think some of them will get involved in the business. And but the real, and I said this earlier, find out what you're good at. Find out what you like. And if you like it, you're probably going to be successful. And you can hire lawyers, you can hire accountants, you can do all those sorts of things if you're a good salesman. The most beneficial thing I ever learned in my life was not at university. I had summer jobs selling door to door, shrubs and trees to farm. That was the most beneficial education I had, and I loved it. And to this day, I look back and say, okay, the ability to sell, if you don't sell, you get 0. If you do sell and it's a commission, you end up. And I was highly rewarded to want to work harder, and I was good at it, and I understood that. And so find out what you're good at. What subjects are you good at in school? What are I'm terrible in math. Okay, don't become an accountant.
Right.
That's an indirect way of answering the question of saying, get experience at different things so you get exposure. One of the problems going into the family business, you may not get that because it's too singular. Try and get some exposure beyond that.
Well, thank you so much, Jack, for your generosity. And I think your special gift of appreciating what has been done, but also being honest and forward-looking and thinking about what is next. And we are grateful that you have shared that with our community.
It's such a gift to spend time with you.
Well, you're very nice.
Really
Thank
grateful.
You.